there are a lot of questions, such as why was Niski allowed to have Gragas this many times? Very mysterious question.
It makes me think that, here's the thing, if I had to speculate, Monty, because obviously that pick started to be played a lot more in LEC this split, I will bet a bunch of mids tried it in scrims who didn't get it to work, and it made some teams think, like, we could deal with it, but it's like, the players who are really good on that champion are fucking way too good, mate. Like, you can't let them have it. They just control the whole game.
Well, it's also, I mean, I get that Chasey was performing extremely well in the Jace, and Jace is a power pick, but they basically, by the end of the finals, BDS had run out of options where they're banning Jace and Kennen on blue side, which means Mad Lions can just save counter pick for R5. BDS blind picks Cassante, and then Chasey just demolishes them with Gwen. So, you know, my question would be at that point in time, what's really the purpose behind banning out the Jace and Kennen if they have R5 counter pick? And Chasey has been doing so well. Clearly, it's not like he can't play Gwen or a Cassante counter, right? Cassante is thought as a very, for the most part, safe blind pick, but Adam has not been a great Cassante player.
Mate. It's not his champion.
Yeah, and I think what was really key is that Mad Lions downloaded BDS in a lot of ways, and just basically didn't allow them to play the game they wanted to play. And so much of BDS's style is predicated on Adam either getting one of his Adam champs like Darius or Olaf, and then bullying top lane to draw their jungler up there, while meanwhile Sheo makes plays on the bot side to get his mid and ADC Crowny ahead. So it's like Adam is basically just a distraction. He's a low economy top laner that plays one of two styles. One of them is hyper aggressive lane winners to pull the jungle away. And so BDS then can start to stack dragons and force fights around third or fourth dragon. But they also have been very successful in getting early leads onto Crowny and Nuke on scaling picks. That has been the secret sauce. But if you don't get those early leads, then this team doesn't really function well. And the other thing Adam does is he'll play, you know, a Scion or a Malphite in the top side, and then lose gracefully, and then eventually get into a position where even if he has no money and no items, he can provide crowd control to a certain degree. But you can't rely on this guy to be a very heavy, like, strong side top laner, and his champion pool at the end of the day appears to be limited. It appears to be limited. And as Dom, I thought, very astutely pointed out on Power Spike, the BDS also can't play a bunch of the meta picks. Like, they can't play any mid. They can't play a lot of the top laners like Kennen or Jace.
Almost like their team isn't full of all the best players in LEC at their positions. Weird. Crazy thought I just put out there, you know.
They can't play Ahri, for example.
It's weird though, because the ADC can play all the meta picks. It's almost like he's really fucking good at League of Legends. Never mind. It'll come to me. It'll come to me later.
I think what we can say about BDS is that they really found an effective way to deal with their limitations.
Yes.
And I think a lot of that is big credit to
must have been a
BDS
well-coached team, surely, right? Must be.
Like, there are huge flaws with this team when it comes to the meta, but with the players that they have, they figured out a really effective way to play the game, to the degree that they made it to game 5 of the finals. Now, I don't really want to see this version of BDS at MSI because they are one-dimensional. And if they face off against a top-tier Asian team, it's not going to be pretty, guys. Like, if you thought what Chasey did to Adam was gross, like, imagine what 369 does to Adam. Like, this is not a tenable team. So with that said, congrats to BDS for a massive overperformance and for finding a style of play where Nuke could play Cassiopeia and Crowny could play a hyper-scaling ADC in the bot lane. You figured out a way to distract the enemy team using a player with some strengths. Like, I'm not taking away from Adam that his champion pool doesn't.
No, but he was the distraction, though. That is the point, isn't it? He was there to be the bait.
Exactly. He was the shiny thing. Yes, he was the shiny thing you look at. Yes. Well, he's the magician is like waving something around while like palming the card, and eventually people figured out
I
the
even
magic
think Monty, in a way, it's genius because since he doesn't really understand wave states, he just is pushing all the time. It's like he's the most delicious bait you've ever seen. Like, oh, but if you're a jungler, seeing the fucking top laner pushed in on the wrong wave, it's like your dream, isn't it? You're fucking rushing there as soon as possible. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And I think for a lot of teams, they didn't have players that could necessarily carry out of the top lane as hard as Chasey could. So the advantages you got from keeping Adam down were not as severe.
Yes.
They also really only play on 2 lanes because Adam is so low economy.
Understandably, yeah.
Again, I talked about this on Power Spike, but the nightmare scenario for BDS, if they were to head into one of these international tournaments, was like, what do they do against Gen G? Because like Gen G will just, if Gen G sees this, they're not going to fight you. Like BDS thrive because
they'd lose to the map itself. Teams
would opt in to fighting in bot river around Dragon when their jungler wasn't there, and Crownie would get 3 kills, right? And then he would hyperscale into the late game, or Nuke would get 2 kills on Cassiopeia and hyperscale into the late game. So what happens when Gen G's just like, nah, fuck that. We're just going to dominate top lane, play cross map, get Herald, you know, continue to push our gold advantages in top lane. You can have 2 dragons. We don't care. We're going to fight you with a 4K gold lead on 3rd Drake. And they play all lanes of the map better. I think BDS does really horribly. So that's obviously like picking a giant stylistic mismatch that I think would really strike at the core of BDS's weaknesses. But BDS did get this far by fooling people for the most part, or drawing them into fights. And again, that is a skill. That is a skill to make the enemy play your style. But at the end, you saw at the end of the series, the last 2 games were not even close. They were enormous stomps by Mad Lions.
I would even suspect as much as what you're saying. Like, if I had to guess, I think part of the weird drafting decisions people made against BDS, the weird ways they didn't identify the player style and win conditions you're talking about, I would actually suggest some of that was hubris. I think players in teams like Vitality, if they'd have played them G2, probably did overestimate like the fact that like, hey, I'm a way better player than this guy. Hey, we're all better players. You know, it's that classic thing that we could deal with that, which everyone said against the fucking Adam picks now for like 2 years, guys. Like, why deal with it? That's the real question I have. It's like, why would you? Yeah, why'd you need to? Why not just wreck them?
Just ban all of Darius.
If we're telling you that they're actually not fundamentally really good players, you can just put them in a bad spot in the draft. Why put them in the best spot to deal with it, to prove they're not good? By the way, just win the championship. Don't try to prove people aren't good. Just win games. So I've got a few things to say here. One,
well, also, I think people didn't take Mad Lions seriously, to your point.
No, they didn't.
Why would you? I mean, they were expected to lose at every single phase of this playoff.
Yeah. Well, a few things actually. One, just to give him credit, believe it or not, because this is a crazy call. When the fucking groups part was going on, before those results had happened, I know this is mad, but Rich on side select, and obviously he was in 4 Horsemen, did actually predict Mad Lions would make the final. That is a real call he made. It's crazy because obviously he didn't give any of his context, but fair play. That is a mad call. Secondly, Shio. Game 5, come on, me wanna go. Here's the thing, Shio actually was a pretty good jungler this split, mate. Like, spoiler, I pointed this out before. I don't think the Nook split can ever be repeated or carry on or be replicated. I think he's just an average mid laner in LEC. Here's the thing, I used to say he was the worst mid laner, so I'll give him his average now, right? But I do think that the Shio part, he seems like he does the heavy lifting in that combo. And as you say, this is the reason why, as counterintuitive as it sounds, Monty, you wouldn't actually want to see BDS MSI. I was just referencing it because it looked, quite frankly, like they earned their spot in terms of how the system worked. But if you look at like the way they play, as you say, essentially this is the plateau. Like, they've got everything they can do. Like, stylistically, the coaches have killed it. They've done you covered every hole you can. You've emphasized every strength. You've got all you draft. This is the best scenario, guys, and they still didn't win LEC. Like, internationally, they would get torn apart. I mean, we can transition this, mate. I think the one last thing I'll say is about BDS is this. I do just feel really bad for Crownie, though, because this was not just a chance to win the LEC title, something that must have been a dream of his. But if he'd have won, I think that would have been one of the craziest individual runs ever in the history of Western League. Like, that would be a fucking hard carry performance of all hard carry. Like, what a fucking... I think he still played well enough to win, quite frankly, man. I thought he played
very well.
You know, so I do feel very bad for him.
I mean, it's still absolutely amazing that Crown Shot was not playing on this BDS roster. And I know we've gone over this to death, and I know that there were prerogatives that BDS had for doing well in the ERLs at the time, which kind of handcuffed them into maybe playing X-Matty. But the fact that a guy of this caliber, and also what was wild at the time was I was saying this last year that Crownie was really good, and why the fuck wasn't he? And a bunch of fans were saying things like, oh, he's not good enough to be in LEC. And I was like, that's such an outrageous take. Like, just because he was on bad teams doesn't mean he's not a good player.
He was nearly always the best player on those teams as well. Like, he's had a very good career generally, individually.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, it is pretty wild that, he wasn't the one that was taken by a different LEC team. Like, obviously he had some struggles getting cut from various rosters when he was on Vitality, but this guy looks incredibly legit still. And I don't think it's just this meta. I think he is playing these scaling champions because that's what his team needs stylistically him to do for this whole thing to work, like the whole BDS style to work. But yeah, I think he's just been really, really good. And at least this roster has something to build around, or Crownie can probably go and upgrade. I mean, look how many other ADCs kind of bombed out so far this split, like Neon not working out, but Crownie's been a breath of fresh air and kind of a revelation as he returned to the league. And especially with players that weren't super strong around him, he really shouldered the burden that was required in order to carry this team. So regardless of the fact that they lost, the run has been deeply impressive from BDS, and they've got something to work with.
Oh, I'll just tell you a stat, people, because I tracked this. I had a look. Over the split, even with the final Monty, they went like 16-5 in games played. That's 76% win rate against the whole LEC. That's mental. See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.